Hello, my name is SK Williams, and this video is an update video, so not much will be established in the context of this video. However, I am going to explain a few things that are going to, unfortunately, make my videos a little odd sounding. At least on YouTube. This is because I am going to have to start using some euphemisms, as well as odd speech patterns. Granted, I have some odd speech patterns anyway, everyone does. There are certain cadences people use, certain word choices that both identify them as parts of various social groups, as well as identify them as individuals. However, I'm going to exaggerate some of those, and I am going to have to distort my voice in some context. This is because a certain Mr. Al Gore does not like his rhythm interrupted. And there seems to be a bit of a bypass istism against certain topics spoken by certain people with certain political opinions that are often connected to their religious beliefs as well. And while I don't really fit neatly into those categories, well, Al Gore doesn't seem to know much of a difference there. All he cares about is his rhythm. And so, as a result, I'm going to have to talk about a certain Mr. Wolf or Mr. Danube. Both are aliases for the same man. And he was a political leader in the land of the barbarians, whom the Romans often had troubles with. I am, of course, speaking of the land of germs, with a certain party that embraced socialism and that also embraced nationalism. As you can see, even in this video, I am being a bit choppy. Now, I may make a few videos without the euphemisms, but I have made videos where I have been flagged, and a couple of videos that I have released recently have not gone through, so I am going to have to start, if I wish to resume videos, talking with unusual pauses and a bit of an exaggerated voice, you see, in order to hope that it is much harder to catch. Unfortunately, if I speak a bit faster or if I break up the words too much, I make it more difficult for my human audience as well. Oh, granted, my human audience will much more easily and much more readily understand what I am saying than the machines. Although the machines do tend to adapt to such oddities of speech, you see. And granted, I often have pauses anyway. Part of this is simply because I grab a drink or am looking at a book or reading something, and since I don't record my face when I'm doing these, I either work with animation or else I simply put up still images. A lot of times people don't notice that. I also do a lot with either only partial outlines rather than a full script, or no script at all. I'm actually rather good at speaking, and I know the topic that I speak about very well before I begin, so I often don't need a script. However, I may be much more reliant on scripts specifically so that I can process the information whilst using the euphemisms. I don't want to slip up, you see. However, especially early on, my next few videos may sound a bit extreme. They will sound odd, but I'm hoping two things happen. The first is I'm hoping the audience gets used to the odd cadence and the odd delivery and certain odd word choices. But in addition, I am hoping to tone it down because whenever you start a new process, you sometimes go a bit too far or fall a bit too short. And I tend to go the too far route, but I am hoping it settles down. So, for the next few videos that I release, I will be a bit odd, and I did practice a few different methods. And I may use a few different methods to help prolong my ability to make videos uninterrupted before I have to adjust, and I will constantly be making adjustments specifically to avoid problems, hence why I have two aliases for a certain political leader and not one. You see, and I don't want to make this update video a political debate. I'm not particularly deeply political myself, but we tend to think in very binary terms, and computers even more so than humans. And a good deal of the things I talk about will be understood, even if not by a human, by the computer, as right-wing and as conservative. And as such, there's a whole list of commands and variances that the computer will implement based upon my right-wing politics that might flag me as some sort of danger that I don't even think a politically motivated human would do. But it is precisely because of the public narrative. Now, I don't think the public narrative of how violent or dangerous the right is actually the truth. I don't really think Christian nationalism, for instance, is the grave threat that people say it is. And I am going to be talking about that topic. However, that doesn't mean that I myself am a Christian nationalist or that I have the beliefs that would be attributed to Christian nationalism or even the beliefs of a typical American conservative that one would imagine, even if one was being fair to their positions or if one was a typical American conservative. For example, I'm actually a monarchist, not someone who lionizes America's founders. I actually see them as more villain than hero. But the computer would probably flag me as far right and an extremist. So when you combine the idea that I'm a right-wing extremist with the fact that I am talking about Christianities, I'm probably going to be flagged as a Christian nationalist, a right-wing extremist, and that will, of course, make me far more dangerous in the eyes of Al Gore than someone else would be. And because his rhythm leans left, I will, of course, have more restrictions. Granted, I also think humans are becoming a bit too censorious on the left as well. However, I don't think this is a malady that inflicts the left instead of the right. Rather, I think that anyone who thinks that because they're right-wing or left-wing, the faults don't apply to them, are deceiving themselves about human nature. Nevertheless, in the world we live in, we have an idea of right-wing being bad. Although we also have an idea of right-wing, at least as far as America is concerned, being Republican. And of course, as a Christian nationalist, meaning that I am pro-Trump and view him as a new messiah and supports insurrection and all that. The truth is that if you look at political theory, I am actually right-wing. That's because I am a monarchist, and monarchism is a right-wing position. Although many in America view monarchism as a left-wing position if they are on the right, or at least consider themselves on the right, especially since Glenn Beck released Cleon Skousen's book on the topic. But, well, he popularized it. It had already been released. And that idea being the difference between left and right is big and small government, with the left being big government authoritarianism and the right being small government. And that's not really what right and left are about. It also doesn't make sense because Skousen claimed monarchy was a left-wing ideal along with communism, even though one can have a small government monarchy. And the goal of communism is actually anarchism, which, according to Skousen, was on the right, but that's beside the point. In many ways, what you see on the left is the same as what you would see in the self-declared skeptic community, where they attack religion, but really only attack Christianity. And that's not really surprising, since the self-declared skeptic community began with left-wing politics. The modern-day skeptic community actually got started in the 19th century, and even the new atheists from 20 years ago were doing nothing but reviving old arguments and ideas from the 19th century free-thought movement and from the 19th century rationalists like Charles Bradlaugh and George Jacob Holyoake and Joseph McCabe and people like that. But what you end up with is a left-wing ideology that is being justified through a philosophical background that is claiming to be simply skeptical of others, but is really there to discredit them and to debunk them. The people who call themselves skeptics today are actually pseudo-skeptics who've decided in advance what is true and what is not, and who simply construct arguments around what they want people to believe is true. Which is ironic, because this is what they claim apologetics is for religion, for Christianity in particular, and they claim that it makes apologetics inherently dishonest. And I'm not claiming that there are no dishonest apologists. I'm not saying Christians can do no wrong, which I'm often accused of, but I am saying that the skeptic community's primary way of operating is to accuse religion in general and Christianity in particular of grave evils, and to never allow you to criticize them, and to create a situation where they can attack Christianity. And Christians must defend their religion, but Christians aren't allowed to attack their beliefs. They'll even claim they don't have beliefs, they merely lack belief in a god. When in reality they have a plethora of beliefs. Even if they did not believe God doesn't exist and made no claims on that, they are making certain other claims that make it obvious that they have a specific belief system. And that specific belief system is, of course, humanism, or secular humanism, which, while they insist is not a religion, is actually a religion. The first Humanist Manifesto even called it a religion, and ironically, the rationalists of the 19th and early 20th century thought they were founding a new religion and even said so. Julian Huxley even said that it was religion without revelation, and founded UNESCO with the stated purpose of creating a united single world culture with a united single world religion, something he called evolutionary humanism. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, it's actually in his works. You can look up his book, Religion Without Revelation. You can look up his works and essays on other topics. You can look up his works on eugenics, which, for some reason, we are being told now was pushed by Christians and is a creationist pseudoscience, and are being told was founded by a Christian minister, Thomas Malthus, when in reality it was founded by Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, and was promoted by Major Leonard Darwin, his grandson. And I'm not saying that to vilify evolution. I know I'll be said that I am, but it's just a fact. However, the modern tactic is a very simple one. You deny your own history, you claim to not represent anything, and you use that as a shield. And if anyone ever tries to question you on it, you simply deflect back to them. And then, of course, they play the victim, claiming that they're the ones just defending themselves against the Christian. And then, of course, they turn that around and claim the Christian is playing the victim, when in reality the Christian was the aggressor. And you see that same tactic played out in the left, in modern left-wing media a lot as well. And again, the right can use the tactic too. It's just standard bullying. But in the modern world, it's very much the left that's in control of the major media outlets. So they are the ones that tend to use this method far more, at least at present. And we have a cultural zeitgeist that typically both sides agree with, at least in the broad general ideas. The right wing in America is the Republicans, the left wing is the Democrats. Right wing conservatives are patriots who idolize America's founders, whilst the left may hold to high esteem the ideals and may regard the founders with a great deal of reverence, would be more critical of them and embrace a more progressivist view. And beyond that, there are certain differences depending upon which side you ask, usually with one side being vilified and the other side being lionized. And you see this quite often on both sides, like I said. It's why I don't particularly concern myself with politics, except for the fact that I do concern myself with religion. And at present, it isn't really Christianity that is more engaged in politics. It is secular humanism, which claims to not be a religion, and an attempt to create this secular world where we're supposed to have a utopia, and an attempt to deny that such a secular society has ever been tried. The Soviets, for instance, did not really try secularism, and many even outright claim the Soviets were really following a form of religion. Which is ironic, because they will also insist that an atheist can't be religious, because by definition you need to believe in a god to be religious, and the Soviets did not. But sometimes they'll even fix that by saying the Soviets worshipped the state as a god, which itself is silly, because the Soviets were not statists, they were not nationalists. Communism stands for the abolition of the state. And while it is true that it is unlikely they were going in that direction, none of them ever held to a belief system where they actually thought of the state as something to serve. They didn't have a statist mentality. But that is how we generally try and fit them into worshipping a god. And if someone says that it's hypocritical to claim you're not religious because you don't worship a god, while claiming other people who don't worship a god are religious. And you see modern-day writers like Harari in his 21 Lessons for the 21st Century leaning heavily into that idea, because a true secular society would be one that values truth above all things, and its second highest ideal would be compassion, and so the Soviets weren't real secularism. And if a Christian, of course, were to use that to dismiss certain groups as not really Christian, such as a certain Triple K organization, or such as a certain Baptist church that went west of the Burrows, they would be accused of doing a no true Scotsman fallacy, but luckily atheists can't commit logical fallacies. Or he would say that failure to live up to a secular ideal doesn't invalidate those ideals. But if a Christian were to use the same arguments, they would be ridiculed. Christianity and other religions are to be judged by the actions of the people, and most notably by the violent or distressing or authoritarian actions, whilst secularism is purely judged by its ideal, not by the people who are living within it. Unfortunately, in the real world, it's real people who have to live in a real society, not abstract ideas, living in some sort of ethereal realm of thought. And I don't really think Harari is as compassionate or as interested in truth as he claims he is. After all, he makes no effort to actually understand how religious people think. he basically reduces religion in the same way Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins does to believing in some ancient book. And because you think that ancient book was written by a god, and even criticizes religion by saying that there is something deeply disturbing about thinking you need a book to teach you morals and not killing because you think some book said so, and claims that this is not compassion but simply obedience and is the flaw of religion, and that secularism isn't like that. A secularist doesn't kill out of compassion and recognizing real suffering, whilst a religious person simply obeys a rule in some ancient book they think a god wrote. And that is reductionist and not really being honest with how people think about their religions. It's not even really true that all religions have a specific holy book to follow, and even when you're talking about Christians or Jews or Muslims, it's very obvious that this isn't really true. And of course, he holds more ire toward Christianity than others. And we know that because in the same section where he talks about that, he says something along the lines where it makes it very obvious that he views Christianity in more violent terms and is trying to convey that they are more violent. And this isn't an exact quote because I don't have the book right in front of me, but he says something along the lines of how we can allow religion to continue to exist. People can wear whatever silly clothes they want or participate in whatever silly rituals, so long as their religious values give way when they conflict with secular values, which I don't really think he understands that calling people's beliefs silly and talking about silly clothes and silly customs is itself proof he is not compassionate. And he doesn't really give a reason why secular values should prevail, but I'll discuss that in another video. For now, it's obvious that he has more contempt for Christianity because he brings up these examples and says something along the lines, and again, it's not an exact quote, but something along the lines of, an Orthodox Jew would have to respect other people and not think he's better than others. A Christian would have to accept religious diversity and not burn heretics at the stake. A Muslim would have to respect people's free speech and not try and limit it. And you see, the language he uses for the Christian conjures up more of an imagery and idea of the use of violence than the other two, because one can believe one is better than others and not show them respect, like the Orthodox Jew in his analogy, without being violent. And one can fail to respect freedom of speech and ideas of others without necessarily being violent. But one cannot non-violently burn heretics at the stake, and Christians are the only ones he brings that up with, and he does that quite often, so it's not just some isolated incident throughout his works. It's very obvious he has a greater contempt for Christianity than the others, even though he might, like the others, claim he holds all religions with equal contempt, and simply focuses on Christianity because it's the most popular religion where he lives. In reality, he doesn't, and in reality, the modern atheist community is itself a form of religion. I'm not saying a mere lack of belief in a god is a religion. I'm not calling atheism a religion. I am saying atheism is not a lack of belief in a god, but as noted, the modern atheist movement is really just a revival of the rationalist movement of the 19th century, the free thought movement. And it never really went away. They've always had adherents. And you see the same beliefs being promoted. And again, they openly declared themselves followers of a new religion. The Humanist Manifesto of 1933 calls it a new religion. Auguste Comte created the religion of humanity. You have writers like John Dewey and John Dietrich and Roy. By the way, this next bloke is credited in the atheist community often as being the primary author of the Humanist Manifesto and is used to prove that the humanism that I'm calling a religion is not a religion, and that people of all religions can hold to it, and that a Christian who believed in God wrote this document, so it is not inherently atheist. Raymond Bragg. Of course, the problem with that is the Humanist Manifesto itself is inherently atheist. It actually explicitly states the time for theism, deism, and New Thought are over, and explicitly states that we should not believe in God, at least not at this present time. Perhaps later God will be shown to exist, but the time has come for us to give up that belief now. It says that very clearly in the Humanist Manifesto. And if you know anything about Raymond Bragg, you know that while it is true he was a Unitarian minister, he was an atheist, and he is part of a group of men, along with John Dietrich and a few others, that actually shifted Unitarianism away from being Christian into more humanist and atheistic terms. They failed to completely turn it into a humanist church and didn't entirely make it atheistic, but that was their goal. And now, especially after the merger with Universalism, you have a Unitarian church that is moribund, largely because it doesn't have any sort of fixed beliefs. But therein lies the problem. Because very few things can be the Church of England. Very few things can be Anglicanism. You can't have a big tent that doesn't have clearly defined beliefs and expect it to be particularly meaningful or impactful. There are exceptions, like Anglicanism. But with Anglicanism, I want to get into that more later as well. There's a reason it worked, and it didn't with Unitarians. Still, the modern atheist movement is deeply connected to the labor movement, and the modern woke movement and social justice movement was connected to the new atheism and the skeptic community. And that's because it's never really been about lacking belief in a God because there's no evidence, or teaching people logic and reason and critical thinking. It's always been about promoting a certain set of ideas. And while they don't call it a religion now, that is basically what it is. And again, this is not a conspiracy theory. They've outright stated that. And even the modern ones who deny it state it. It just depends upon who they're talking to and what the circumstances are. They will on one moment say they really are working to overturn all religion and create a humanist and atheistic society based upon humanist principles, and on the other hand claim that they aren't trying to do that. They don't even have such shared beliefs. They simply want to be left alone. And this is part of the problem with pinning them down. And the same thing happens with the left these days as well. And it's done to keep people off balance, and being able to do not pin them down, it creates a double bind. No matter what you say, it's wrong. But the reason I'm talking about all of this is because it actually relates to the way I'm going to be making videos. It shouldn't affect all of them. I don't really think, for instance, when I read the Bishop's Bible, I'm going to resume that. That will be particularly problematic. But there are certain things that I'm going to have to change based upon this mentality. And there is a drive in society to convert it to a new religion that is denying it a religion, and to move society into a new direction. I want to talk about that later. This is an update video after all. I'm not going into detail. But it is relevant for this video because that is exactly what I'm running afoul of. A cultural narrative. One that vilifies Christian nationalism. And that sees basically any conservative Christian as promoting Christian nationalism, and that doesn't have a particularly broad view of what positions people can hold. It's essentially binary. There may be more diversity within these two great camps, but there are generally two camps. There's the secular, there's the religious, there's the right wing, there's the left. And I don't think this is a particularly helpful way of looking at the world. And I do want to discuss that. But at the same time, for now, I'm simply explaining the problems I'm having. And that problem, while not specifically tied to the self-declared skeptic community, does come from the left-wing political circles that generally own our friendly host here at UTAV. And yes, that was another euphemism. So, I think I've spoken enough. I am very verbose, and it's been almost half an hour, so I shall discontinue this dialogue. Uh, I think I've said enough after all. Thank you. God bless, and goodbye.